Let's go to Joseph Kotrie-Monson, who is the director of Mary Monson's Solicitors on Fleet Street, for a view from inside the courtroom, one might say. Joseph, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Darren.
It was instructive, wasn't it, to listen back to those arguments against the televising of the Commons all those years ago, because those who oppose the filming and televising of court proceedings seem to make the same sort of arguments, don't they?
Absolutely. And isn't it interesting, Darren, that crusty old politics, the legal profession, is still 30 years behind in this process? I've got to say, Darren, if this is what it looks like, then it could be, and we're talking about a trial, they're not to be broadcast, but it could be a significant step towards a long-awaited transparency in our courts.
You're quite right. These trials would not be broadcast themselves, but it would clearly, at some point, be intended, I would imagine, to allow televised trials.
This is a soft test.
Yeah.
It seems finally that the politicians and the judiciary are waking up to the fact that the criticism they get in the press, or the legal system gets in the press, for being murky or opaque or unfair, is in part due to this naturally conservative culture where we're very keen as lawyers and the judges to keep it very closed. We're terrified of opening our justice system up to the public. But Aaron, what that school of thought fails to take account of is the basic truth that you can't control the public's view of something by shrouding it in mystery. That just makes them more suspicious that the system isn't doing its job.
What do you think people who are so reluctant, in your profession, people who are so reluctant to see the cameras used in a way that might lead to televised proceedings, what specifically are they trying to protect, would you say?
Isn't it interesting to hear that comment from that clearly conservative, fairly establishment parliamentarian that we heard just earlier talking about televising the debates in the Commons? But essentially his argument, if you deconstruct it, was this is no use to the electorate. They wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't know what to do with it. Well, the reality is, at the moment, we have a situation now where our greatest source of information about what happens in courts is the press, who are biased, naturally, one way or the other. They're often serving an agenda, often around making the public feel somehow scared or insecure about their system not working. The reality is that by bringing in cameras, not just sentencing remarks, but in general, albeit with safeguards, I mean, there are certain types of cases it wouldn't be appropriate for, etc. But by bringing in cameras, you're democratising the process in the way that it was originally intended. You talked about justice being seen to be done. That's why the public can go into the public gallery. The idea that in the context of modern media we can't have that type of remote access like we do in all other aspects of our life, it's just so outdated. And it really is time for change.
Do you find that people do make their way into the public gallery? Is there a genuine interest from members of the public in what happens in court?
Retired people. And the reason that retired people who are interested in doing it do, and law students, and the reason those two categories of people can do it is not because they're the only ones who are interested, because they're the only ones who've got the time. Because the reality is that these proceedings, there is 80% of it is fumbling around and legal arguments and all of this type of stuff. And what someone might regard as the action, the interesting bit, is 15 or 20%. And you can distill that through television. You can't distill that. You have to invest time to actually be there.
Right, and you sound, Joseph, if I might say, like a very modest and sensible chap. But so I'm certain this wouldn't apply to you. But is there not a danger? And I don't really see this danger myself, but some people do. Is there not a danger that some practitioners of the law might just find their ego gets the better of them, and they really want to see that their peroration or whatever is broadcast to as many people as possible?
I think if you're worried about advocates becoming hyper expressive or somehow seeing themselves as some kind of big deal. I'm afraid that the horse may have already bolted on that one. The reality is the advocates in my firm, if they don't take that attitude with them into court, then what are they doing there in the first place? They're charged with the defence of somebody. They can at least put some welly into it.
Whether they are showing off or otherwise, in whichever terms we want to use that phrase. And very quickly, how far do you think this will go, Joseph? Clearly this is a trial. We both seem to think that it's going to go further at some point. How far and how quickly? Well,
like everything else that the legal establishment does in this country, it'll be agonisingly slow and it won't go far enough. The reality is this should go very far. It should go all the way to trials. It's impractical, of course, to have 5 or 10 days of trial just constantly streamed, although it would be possible. The reality is that just sentencing remarks is not enough. You need the submissions from both sides, like we already have in Court of Appeal cases. That's already happening. You already see the advocates. But people giving evidence, nothing wrong with that, provided there's consent. It would have to be very carefully thought out. Don't suggest it wouldn't for a minute. But the reality is that this is where I differ from that the 1980s or 1970s politician that we heard earlier. The reality is the public can handle it. They're not so stupid as the establishment think. Let them have the information.
All right, thank you very much for that. Joseph Kotrie-Monson, Director of Mary Monson Solicitors on Fleet Street. It sounds as if we'll be having that conversation again at various points in the future as this process of reform grinds slowly on.